June 4th, 1942. The vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, midway between Hawaii and the Japanese mainland, churned under a relentless sun. Aboard the USS Enterprise, one of the Yorktown-class carriers steaming at flank speed with Task Force 16, the air hummed with the low growl of Pratt & Whitney engines warming up on the flight deck. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron gripped the edge of the Yorktown's ready room bulkhead, his eyes scanning the faces of his 12 dauntless dive bomber pilots. Young men, most under 25, their flight suits stained with sweat and grease. The radio crackled faintly in the background, a Morse code operator tapping out urgent dispatches from Pearl Harbor, Japanese fleet inbound. Carriers confirmed. Waldron's Torpedo Squadron 8, detached from the Hornet, but now operating under Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's command, felt the deck vibrate as the carrier cut through swells that sent spray arcing over the island's superstructure. The salt air bit at exposed skin, mingling with the acrid tang of aviation fuel and the distant rumble of anti-aircraft drills. "Listen up," Waldron barked, his voice steady but edged with the gravel of a man who'd seen too many dawn patrols. "Intelligence says Nagumo's got 4 Kaga-class carriers out there. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. They're coming for Midway and we're the anvil. Our job, find 'em, hit 'em low, and give the dive bombers their window." You can almost feel it, the knot in your gut as the briefing drags on. Maps unrolled across a scarred table, showing atolls and vectors, the red pencil marks tracing enemy courses from the marshals. Ensign George Gay, the radio man gunner in Waldron's own TBF Avenger, shifted in his seat, fiddling with the leather straps of his Mae West life vest. He'd flown patrols off Wake Island months back, dodging Zeros like angry hornets, but this felt different. The Enterprise's radar pics had been ghosting for hours, blips that vanished like smoke, while Fletcher juggled reports from PBY Catalinas prowling the horizon. By 06:15, the order came: launch the strike. Waldron led his squadron off the Hornet earlier that morning, but now, as the clock ticked toward 0900, the full air group from Enterprise and Yorktown was airborne. A swarm of 35 SBD Dauntlesses climbing into the blue under Captain Miles Browning's sharp eye. The wind whipped across the deck, howling through the arrestor wires, as pilots like Lieutenant Richard Best strapped into their cockpits, the 50 caliber machine guns on their wings glinting in the sunlight. Below decks, damage control parties drilled with hoses and foam. The clang of shovels against steel, a grim reminder of what Coral Sea had cost them last month. Yorktown, limping home, scarred but seaworthy after frantic repairs. Out over the water, Waldron's Torpedo 8 flew low, skimming waves that frothed white under their props. The formation stretched thin, 15 TBD Devastators lumbering at 150 knots, their 21-inch torpedoes slung heavy beneath. Waldron's voice cut through the static on the TBS radio. "Stay tight, boys. We're the hammer. Dive bombers will spot from altitude." But doubt gnawed at him. The morning search had been a bust, Spruance's scouts circling empty ocean, fuel clocks ticking mercilessly. Nagumo's fleet was out there, screened by cruisers like the Tone and Chikuma, their floatplanes scouting ahead. At 0920, the first break came. A PBY from Midway, callsign Red Fish, crackled over the circuit. Enemy carriers bearing 320 distance 200 miles. Cheers erupted in cockpits, but Waldron's jaw tightened. The bearing was off. Nagumo had zigzagged south to launch his strike on the atoll. By the time the message filtered through to Task Force 17, 12 precious minutes had slipped away in the chaos of relays. Cryptanalysts in Pearl had broken the Japanese codes weeks ago, pinpointing the invasion force, but now, in the heat of the moment, a junior signals officer aboard the Yorktown misread the vector, relaying it as 240 degrees instead. 12 minutes. That's all it took for the Devastators to veer wide, burning fuel on a ghost course while Zeros from Akagi patrolled the real approach. You imagine it now. the sun beating down on aluminum wings, the drone of engines fading into isolation as Waldron pressed on, his squadron alone in the vast blue. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay's Torpedo 6 from Enterprise paralleled them, but the timing fracture split the attack. High above, Best's dive bombers circled futilely, searching for the low flyers that should have pinned the enemy cap. On Akagi's deck, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo paced, his flight crews rearming Aichi D-3A Vals with torpedoes for a second wave. Fatal indecision. But the Americans' gift of time let him regroup. Waldron spotted smoke on the horizon at 0950, too late. "There they are!" he shouted into his mask, banking toward the black puffs from Hiryu's stack. But the Japanese carriers turned into the wind, launching combat air patrol. 72 Zeros, led by veterans like Lieutenant Hirata, slicing through the sky like falcons. The Devastators staggered in, pedals to the floor, releasing Mark 13 torpedoes that porpoised wildly in the chop. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from the cruiser screens, 5-inch guns from the heavy cruiser Mikuma barking shells that stitched the water. Ensign Gay hunched in his turret, the Avenger shuddering as tracers zipped past. Waldron's plane dove first, a Zero on his tail raking the fuselage with 20mm cannon fire. The torpedo ran hot, straight, but missed Akagi's bow by yards. One by one, the squadron unraveled, 10 planes shredded in minutes, the sea boiling with debris and oil. Waldron's voice, calm to the end. "We got 'em! Pressing the attack!" Then silence. Back on Enterprise, Spruance gripped the bridge rail, the error dawning as reports flooded in. Those 12 minutes had scattered the strike, leaving the dive bombers exposed. But in the skies above, Best and his wingmen broke through, screaming down on Soryu at 10,000 feet, bombs away in a thunderous plunge. If you want to dive deeper into battles like this one, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. We've got more history unfolding. As the Yorktown shuddered under distant explosions, the real turning point loomed, the mistake's ripple just beginning to spread. The dive bombers break through high above the fray at 10,200 feet. The SBD Dauntlesses of Lieutenant Commander Clarence McCluskey's squadron from the Enterprise slice through scattered clouds, their engines a steady thrum against the vast Pacific sky. It was 10:22 on June 4th, 1942, and the sun glared off the waves far below, turning the ocean into a blinding mirror. McCluskey, a lanky Annapolis grad with a reputation for cool calculation, peered through his cockpit canopy, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The 12-minute blunder had scattered the low-flying torpedo planes like chaff in the wind, but up here, the dive bombers pressed on, fuel gauges dipping perilously as they hunted for the Japanese fleet. You can sense the urgency building, the way the stick vibrates in your hands, the faint chatter of the intercom linking pilot and gunner. Ensign Fred Downey, tucked in the rear seat of McCluskey's plane, scanned the horizon with his .30 caliber gun ready. The leather of his goggles chafing against sweat-slicked skin. Reports had trickled in over the radio. Waldron's Torpedo 8 annihilated. Lindsay's Torpedo 6 faring little better, their Mark 13s splashing harmlessly, while Zeros swarmed like sharks. But those sacrifices weren't in vain. The Combat Air Patrol, those agile Mitsubishi A6M Zeros from the carriers Akagi and Kaga, had dipped low to shred the Devastators, leaving the skies above perilously thin. McCluskey's voice crackled over the squadron frequency, steady as a metronome. "Form on me. Search pattern Delta, split into sections." His 6 planes veered north, while Lieutenant Edgar Stebbins took the others south, the formation fanning out over empty water. Below, the Yorktown's air group under Lieutenant Wally Gallagher had already drawn first blood. At 10:20, just minutes after spotting the enemy veins, Nagumo's 4 flat tops steaming in tight formation, screened by battleships like the Yamato and cruisers Tone and Chikuma, Gallagher's Dauntlesses screamed down on the Soryu. The carrier's deck erupted in chaos as the first bombs fell. Lieutenant Richard Halsey Best, leading VB-6 from Enterprise but detached to Yorktown's strike, rolled inverted at 500 feet, his bomb release a thunderclap. The 0-pound Mk-13 penetrated Soryu's flight deck amidships, igniting fueled Zeros prepped for launch. Secondary explosions ripped through the hangar, Avgas tanks blooming into orange fireballs that licked the superstructure. Captain Yanagimoto on Soryu fought the wheel, ordering damage control parties to flood magazines, but it was too late. "Abandon ship," came the grim call as the carrier listed, her bow dipping into the swells, the acrid smoke carrying the screams of trapped crewmen. Back in McCluskey's formation, tension coiled like a spring. They'd burned precious minutes on the wrong bearing, the initial PBY report mangled through Yorktown's radio shack, a lieutenant's fat-fingered transcription turning 320 degrees into 240, sending scouts chasing phantoms. Now, at 10:25, a faint smudge appeared on the horizon. Not the smoke from Soryu, but the stacks of Akagi and Kaga turning into the wind to recover their planes. McCluskey's heart pounded as he banked hard. "Bogies sighted! Dive on the lead carrier!" The Zeros were low, vectoring toward the crippled torpedo remnants. Only a handful climbed to intercept. The plunge began at 500 feet, a controlled freefall that pressed men into their seats. Airspeed built to 280 knots, wind howling over the cowling as dive brakes deployed with a shudder. Lieutenant Earl Gallagher, in the lead VB-3 plane from Yorktown, targeted Kaga first. Her deck swarmed with activity, mechanics rearming B-5N Kates with contact torpedoes for a follow-up strike on Midway, oblivious to the peril above. Gallagher's bomb struck true, crumpling the forward elevator and sparking a chain reaction. Fires raced through the wooden deck, devouring aircraft and igniting ordnance. Kaga's captain, Jisaku Okada, bellowed orders from the bridge, but flames blocked the escape routes below. You feel the G-forces now, the world inverting as the stick yanks back at 200 feet, pulling out just above the wave tops. Tracers from Kaga's 25mm anti-aircraft guns, puffing black bursts from her twin mounts, stitched the sky, but the cap was fractured. A Zero, piloted by the ace Saburo Sakai, clawed upward too late, his 20mm shells glancing off a Dauntless's tail. McCluskey leveled out, his own bomb away on Akagi, missing by a heartbeat but cratering the deck near the island. Then Lieutenant Sam Adams, from VS-6, connected, a direct hit amidships that ruptured fuel lines, turning the flagship into an inferno. Nagumo himself staggered on Akagi's bridge, the deck heaving under his feet as explosions rocked the ship. The Vice Admiral, his uniform singed, gripped the rail, watching Kaga burn nearby, her crew leaping into the sea amid geysers of steam. "Counter-attack! Launch everything!" he roared, but the carriers were doomed. Soryu had sunk already, her hull splitting under the weight of fire. Now Akagi and Kaga followed, listing heavily as Hiryu, the last of the quartet, maneuvered frantically to evade. From Enterprise's bridge, Admiral Raymond Spruance watched the radio reports flood in, his face a mask of grim resolve. The 12 minutes had nearly unraveled the assault, dooming the torpedo squadrons to near total loss. Only Ensign Gay's Avenger floating amid the wreckage, bobbing like a cork. But the dive bombers had turned the tide, their 1,000-pounders proving the equalizer. Fletcher, aboard the damaged Yorktown, coordinated the recovery, his voice calm over the circuit. "Well done, boys. RTB at once." Yet as the Dauntlesses formed up for the long haul back, engines straining on fumes, Hiryu's flight deck buzzed to life. Captain Tomeo Kaku ordered every available plane aloft, 16 Zeros and 10 Vals, led by the veteran Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi. Nagumo's remnants weren't finished. Revenge brewed in the smoke, the battle's fury far from spent. Hiryu's counterstrike unleashed. Aboard the Japanese carrier Hiryu, the last beacon of Nagumo's once mighty force, the flight deck thrummed with desperate urgency at 10:45 on June 4, 1942. Smoke from her sisters, Akagi, Kaga and Soryu, billowed on the horizon like funeral pyres, their hulls twisting in agony as they slipped beneath the waves. Captain Tomeo Kaku, his face etched with the strain of command, strode amid the chaos of his deck crew, barking orders in clipped Japanese. The air reeked of burning oil and scorched metal, carried on the hot breeze from the infernos to the north, while the sea churned with the debris of fallen comrades, life rafts dotting the swells, survivors paddling furiously toward the screening destroyers. Kaku's voice cut through the din. "Launch all aircraft. Target the American carriers." Mechanics swarmed the ready planes, 16 A6M-0s and 10 Aichi D3A Vals, their engines coughing to life with the whine of Nakajima Sakai radials. Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi, a battle-hardened pilot with scars from the raid on Pearl Harbor, strapped into his Zero's cockpit, the leather seat warm against his flight suit. His squadron mates, including the hotshot ensign Toshihei Iwasaki, taxied into position, props blurring into silver discs. The 12-minute folly that had scattered the American torpedo attack now avenged itself in reverse. Nagumo's indecision spared Hiryu from the initial dive bomber onslaught, buying this window for retaliation. You can almost hear it. The crescendo of throttles advancing, the deck vibrating as catapults hurled the first Vals airborne, wings catching the wind over the carrier's bow. Below, in the hangar, auxiliary crews wrestled with the remnants of the air group. But Kaku prioritized speed over perfection. Intelligence from Chikuma's scout plane, a Nakajima E-8N float plane that had evaded the melee, pinpointed the American task force, 3 carriers steaming southwest, Yorktown trailing slightly after absorbing near misses from the morning skirmish. Fletcher's flagship, her anti-aircraft batteries primed with 5-inch 38 guns and 1-inch quad mounts, ploughed through the swells at 25 knots, unaware of the hornet's nest she'd stirred. By 1100, Kobayashi's fighters formed a protective screen over the Vals, the formation climbing to 12, shoe-trodden feet under a sky streaked with contrails from the retreating Dauntlesses. The Zeros, with their 20mm cannon and 7mm machine guns, weaved in loose echelons, conserving fuel for the 50-mile dash. Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga led the dive bombers, his Vals fixed landing gear humming as they descended toward the Yorktown's reported position. The Americans' radar, those finicky CXAM sets on Enterprise and Yorktown, picked up the blips at 11:06, but the 12 minutes of earlier confusion lingered like a shadow, delaying the combat air patrol launch. Spruance on Enterprise's bridge squinted at the scope, his aide relaying, "Bandits, bearing 010, Angels 10. Scramble orders flew, but only a handful of F-4F Wildcats from the Yorktown's VF-42 could intercept in time, their 100-horsepower engines straining against the altitude. The clash ignited 20 miles out, Zeros pouncing on the Wildcats like falcons on pigeons. Kobayashi rolled into a thatch-weave evasion, his Zero's agility turning the tables, tracers arcing as he hosed a Grumman with 20mm rounds, sending it spiraling into the sea in a plume of foam. Ensign Stanley Rouleau, one of Yorktown's pilots, fought back fiercely, his 50 cals chattering, but the numbers overwhelmed. 3 Wildcats down in minutes, the sky clearing for Tomonaga's Vals to break through at 11:15. You feel the adrenaline surge, the wind rushing past the open cockpit, the dive brakes snapping open as the lead Val nosed over, targeting the Yorktown's island superstructure. From the carrier's deck, Captain Elliot Buckmaster gripped the rail, the alarm klaxons wailing through the humid air. "All hands to battle stations," he shouted as lookouts tracked the incoming swarm. The Yorktown's 1-inch pom-poms erupted first. pom-pom shells bursting in angry red puffs, followed by the deeper cough of 5-inch batteries zeroing in. Lieutenant Wally Gallagher's returning Dauntlesses had just splashed down, folding wings clanking against the deck when the valves struck. Tomonaga's plane led the plunge from 15 suzerain feet, a screaming dive that built to 300 knots. His 550-pound bomb released a flash of silver against the blue. The bomb struck home at 11:27, penetrating the flight deck forward and detonating in the hangar below. Fuel hoses ruptured, igniting a blaze that raced through parked TBDs and SBDs, the roar drowning out the screams of mechanics trapped in the inferno. Black smoke poured from the vents, the carrier shuddering as secondary explosions popped like fireworks, ordnance cooking off in the heat. Damage control teams, led by Lieutenant Commander Max Lesher, charged in with CO2 extinguishers and hoses, the deck slick with foam and blood. But the attack wasn't over. A second Val, piloted by Ensign Jiro Kawai, scored amidships. The bomb, glancing off the armored deck, but shredding the elevator mechanism in a shower of sparks and twisted steel. Buckmaster ordered hard right rudder, the Yorktown heeling into a turn that sent planes skidding across the deck. But a third hit sealed the damage, a direct strike on the stack that crippled the boilers, steam hissing like a wounded beast. Power flickered, lights dimming below decks as engineers fought to restore propulsion. Crewmen like Seaman First Class Bill Reed hauled ammunition away from the fires, sweat-stinging eyes amid the acrid haze, while medics triaged the wounded, burns and shrapnel wounds turning the sick bay into a charnel house. Aboard Hiryu, cheers erupted as confirmation crackled over the radio. Hits confirmed on enemy carrier. Kaku allowed a grim smile, redirecting Kobayashi's Zeros to strafe any surface targets, their cannon fire raking the Yorktown's anti-aircraft positions. The Wildcats rallied briefly, downing 2 Vals in a furious dogfight, Rouleau claiming one before his plane limped home perforated, but the cost was steep. Yorktown slowed to 20 knots, listing slightly, her air group grounded amid the flames. From Enterprise, Spruance monitored the fray, his fists clenched. "Get fighters up! Cover Yorktown!" The 12 minutes had brought the Japanese this revenge, dooming Fletcher's ship to a vulnerable limp. But as Hiryu's planes wheeled for a second strike, scouts from the Enterprise spotted the lone carrier's position. McCluskey's Dauntlesses, refueled and rearmed, were already taxiing. The cycle of vengeance turning once more. The battle hung in the balance, flames licking the horizon as the Pacific claimed its toll. The reckoning on Hiryu. At 12:45 on June 4th, 1942, the USS Enterprise's flight deck pulsed with frantic energy, the sun dipping toward the horizon and casting long shadows across the armored deck. Admiral Raymond Spruance stood on the bridge, his binoculars trained on the smoke trails, marking Yorktown's plight 30 miles astern. Her hull scarred by Hiryu's vengeful bombs, listing as tugs from the task force closed in. The 12-minute miscommunication that had doomed Torpedo 8 now echoed in this counterblow, scattering American defenses and inviting the Japanese riposte. But Spruance's resolve hardened like the steel beneath his feet. Scouts from the Enterprise's VS-6 had pinned Hiryu at bearing Uro 5, 40 miles out, her deck still launching stragglers from the morning melee. Below, in the ready room, Lieutenant Clarence McCluskey wiped sweat from his brow, his flight suit chafing against salt-crusted skin. The morning dive had scorched 3 of Nagumo's carriers, but Hiryu remained, a lone wolf circling for the kill. "Harm the birds!" McCluskey ordered, his voice cutting through the hum of electric fans. 16 SBD Dauntlesses from VB-6 and VS-6 taxied into the gale whipped up by the carrier's 27-knot sprint, their right cyclone engines roaring to life with bursts of blue flame from the exhaust stacks. Ensign Fred Downey, back in McCluskey's rear seat, checked his 30 caliber gun, the metallic click echoing his pounding heart. Fuel was tight, gauges reading half after the fruitless search, but the Yorktown's distress calls lit a fire under them. You can feel the deck lurch as the catapult officer signals go, the Dauntless surging forward with a jolt that presses you into the harness, wings unfolding mid-air as the plane claws for altitude. McCluskey led the formation in a climbing spiral, the squadron's shadows rippling over the waves below, where destroyer escorts like the USS Balch zigzagged in protective screens, their 5-inch guns swiveling skyward. Radio chatter crackled. "Hear you confirmed, launching Zeros, cap heavy." Lieutenant Maxwell Leslie's VB-3 from Yorktown, diverted to Enterprise after their carrier's damage, joined the fray, adding 10 more dive bombers to the mix. The air group topped 15, or so 0 feet by 1300, contrails feathering behind as they vectored northeast, the Pacific a vast, unforgiving blue. Aboard Hiryu, Captain Tomeo Kaku paced the bridge, the carrier heaving through moderate swells that sent spray arcing over the bow. The morning's triumph, 3 bomb hits on the American flat top, had bought time, but scouts reported incoming blips. Enemy aircraft bearing 210, high altitude. Kaku's face tightened. His air group was depleted, only 8 Zeros and 4 Vals left after losses to the Wildcats. Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi, fresh from strafing Yorktown, refueled on the deck amid the stench of hot asphalt and exhaust. "Scramble! Intercept at all costs!" Kaku commanded, his aides relaying to the hangar, where mechanics fueled A6M fighters with 100-octane avgas, props spinning up in a frenzy. The Zeros lifted off at 13:15, Kobayashi at the van, their agile frames banking into a loose finger formation at 10,000 feet. Hiryu's anti-aircraft crews manned the 25mm Type 96 guns, twin and triple mounts traversing with hydraulic whirs, while lookouts scanned the horizon through the haze of distant fires. Akagi's wreck still smoldering, her crew rescued by the destroyer Nowaki. The 12 minutes of American confusion had given Hiryu this reprieve, allowing her to maneuver south and launch. But now the tide reversed. McCluskey's Dauntlesses crested a cumulus layer, spotting the carrier's wake at 13:20. A grey silhouette screened by the light cruiser Nagara and destroyers Tanikaze and Asashio, steaming at 25 knots into the wind. "Target the carrier! Dive in echelons!" McCluskey barked over the TBS, his plane nosing into the initial push. The Zeros climbed to meet them, Kobayashi's squadron pouncing from the flanks, 20mm cannon fire, stitching the sky in fiery lines. A Dauntless from Leslie's group shuddered under hits, Pilot Lieutenant Walter Rhodey nursing the controls as smoke trailed from the engine cowling. You sense the chaos, the stick bucking in your grip, the gunner's frantic swivels as bullets ping off the armor plate behind the seat. Downey squeezed the trigger, his 30 cal raking a Zero's wing route, but Kobayashi evaded with a snap roll, downing Rhodey's wingman in a burst of debris that spiraled into the sea. The intercept fractured the cap. Only 4 Zeros tangled with the lead element, leaving gaps for the dive bombers to slip through. At 13:25, Leslie's section broke first, rolling inverted at 14,000 feet. The world flipping as gravity yanked them toward Hiryu 2 miles below. Airspeed surged to 290 knots, dive brakes howling like banshees, the carrier growing from a speck to a deadly grid, flight deck lined with armed Vals, her island superstructure bristling with searchlights. Lieutenant Paul Holmberg led the plunge, his bomb sight locked on the forward elevator. "Bombs away!" The 1,000-pound Make 13 tumbled free at 800 feet, the Dauntless pulling out in a gut-wrenching arc, skimming wave tops as AA fire erupted, Hiryu's 5-inch guns thundering, shells bursting in black puffs that peppered the pullout. The bomb struck amidships, crumpling the deck and igniting a chain of explosions in the hangar. Fueled aircraft erupted, avgas flames leaping 100 feet. The heat warping bulkheads as crewmen scrambled with hoses and sand. Kaku staggered on the bridge, ordering, "Helm hard to starboard." But the carrier's turn exposed her beam. McCluskey's own dive followed, his plane shuddering through flak bursts, the bomb glancing off the stack but starting fires that fed on the wooden flight deck. Then Lieutenant Edgar Stebbins connected, a direct hit on the aft section, penetrating to the magazine and blooming into a massive secondary blast that lifted the stern, shredding the rudder controls. Hiryu listed 15 degrees, black smoke billowing as damage parties fought the inferno. Kobayashi's Zeros wheeled back, claiming 2 Dauntlesses in the melee, Ensign Clay Fisher spinning into the ocean, his gunner waving from the yellow raft, but the cost mounted. From Enterprise, Spruance tracked the reports, a faint smile cracking his stoic facade. "That's our 4th. Kaku, bloodied by shrapnel, signaled abandon ship at 13:30, the crew leaping into the sea amid geysers of steam, destroyers closing to pick up survivors. The carrier burned fiercely, her bow rising as she settled by the stern, the Pacific swallowing Nagumo's last hope. As the Dauntlesses formed up on vapor trails, engines coughing on fumes for the 100-mile return, Yorktown's plight worsened. Japanese submarines lurked, and reports of a second Hiryu strike, ghost planes from the sinking carrier, filtered through. Fletcher's task force tightened, the battle's echoes fading into dusk, but the mistake's shadow lingered, promising one final twist in the gathering night. The sun hung low over the Pacific at 1400 on June 4, 1942, painting the waves in hues of molten gold as the USS Yorktown limped through the swells, her once proud silhouette scarred and smoking. Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher had shifted his flag to the cruiser Astoria after the morning's mauling, but the carrier's fate gnawed at him like an open wound. The 12-minute blunder that had scattered the torpedo squadrons now compounded in this vulnerable hour. Yorktown's air group depleted, her flight deck a charred ruin from Hiryu's dive bombers, forcing the task force to steam without adequate eyes in the sky. Below decks, the hum of emergency generators mixed with the drip of seawater through buckled bulkheads, while damage control teams, faces blackened by soot, wrestled hoses against lingering fires in the hangar. Captain Elliot Buckmaster paced the bridge, his uniform torn and sweat-soaked, binoculars sweeping the horizon for the rescue tugs closing from Task Force 16. "Steady as she goes, 15 knots," he ordered, his voice hoarse from shouting over the chaos. The carrier's boilers, crippled by the stack hit, chugged unevenly, propulsion down to a crawl as engineers like Chief Machinist's mate Hank Larson jury-rigged pumps in the engine room, steam hissing like a cornered animal. You can almost taste the salt and fear, the metallic tang of blood from shrapnel cuts, the faint ozone whiff from shorted wiring, as crewmen hauled the dead from twisted compartments, folding American flags over still forms before consigning them to the deep. Aboard the destroyer USS Hammond, steaming parallel at 100 yards, Lieutenant Commander John Barry gripped the rail, his 5-inch guns trained outward in a protective screen. The Hammond's crew, young reservists from the Midwest, scanned the periscope wakes with binoculars. The sea's deceptive calm, broken only by the distant thunder of Yorktown's pumps expelling water. Admiral Raymond Spruance, from Enterprise's command, had vectored PBY Catalinas for anti-submarine patrols, but the vast ocean swallowed their shadows. Japanese submarines, wolf-like in their patience, prowled the fringes, I-168 under Commander Tanikazu Oishi, a sleek Type B boat that had slipped the morning net after shadowing the task force from the northwest. At 14:18, the first tremor came without warning. Deep below Yorktown's keel, I-168's periscope broached silently, Oishi peering through the lenses at the crippled giant. His boat had evaded destroyer pings for hours, the 12 minutes of American disarray earlier that day mirroring his own stealthy approach. No frantic signals, just cold calculation. "Fire tubes 1 and 3, Oishi murmured in the conning tower, the order rippling through the humid confines where sonar men hunched over hydrophones, the faint propeller thrum of Yorktown like a heartbeat. Compressed air whooshed, and 2 Type 95 torpedoes, long-lance weapons with 1 0.0-pound warheads, streaked from the tubes at 49 knots, their oxygen wakes invisible in the chop. You feel it building, the deck quivering under your feet as lookouts on Yorktown's bow shout, "Torpedoes starboard!" Buckmaster lunged for the engine telegraph, ringing full astern, but the carrier's damaged rudders bit slow into the water. The first torpedo struck at 14:23, slamming into the portside amidships with a deafening roar that buckled plates and flooded the forward engine room in seconds. Larson and his team were thrown like ragdolls, boilers rupturing in a scalding geyser that boiled the air, screams echoing as 10 men perished in the steam. The ship heeled 7 degrees, her list worsening as 2. 0 tons of seawater poured in, the hull groaning like a dying beast. Hammond reacted instantly, Barry ordering a hard turn to screen the carrier, depth charges rolling off her racks in a bubbling cascade, K-guns hurling patterns that erupted in white plumes 200 yards out. But the second torpedo found its mark at 14:25, broaching shallow and detonating against Yorktown's island, the blast shearing antennae and crumpling the bridge wing. Shrapnel scythed through the air, felling lookouts and igniting electrical fires that sparked across the deck. Buckmaster, thrown to the grating, hauled himself up, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Counterflood! All hands to abandon if she goes!" Alarms wailed. Klaxons piercing the pandemonium as crewmen scrambled for life jackets, the Mae Wests inflating with a hiss amid the tilting deck. From Astoria's bridge, Fletcher watched in grim silence, the radio crackling with damage reports. Engine room flooded, fires in the galley, casualties heavy. Spruance diverted the cruiser Portland and destroyer Hughes to assist, their screws churning foam as they closed the gap. Hammond, too close in her zeal, took the third torpedo intended for Yorktown, a glancing blow at 14:30 that ripped her amidships, the destroyer's magazine detonating in a cataclysmic bloom of orange flame and twisted steel. She broke in two almost instantly, bow and stern jackknifing before slipping beneath the waves, 80 souls lost in the vortex. Debris raining like shrapnel on the survivors treading water. Oishi, in I-168's depths, noted the hits through the deck speaker's vibrations before diving to 200 feet, evading the frantic depth charge barrage from Hughes and Balch. Their charges hammered the sea, concussions rattling the sub's hull, but Oishi's boat slipped away unscathed, a shadow in the blue. On Yorktown, the list reached 25 degrees by 1500. Her internal watertight doors strained to the limit. Buckmaster coordinated the evacuation, lifeboats swinging out on davits that creaked under the angle, men like Seaman Bill Reed helping wounded over the side into the swells, the water oily with fuel and blood. You imagine the desperation, the cold Pacific lapping at your legs as Carly floats inflate, the carrier's shadow looming as she settles, propellers idling uselessly. Chaplains led prayers amid the shouts, while pilots from the air group, grounded since the morning strike, stripped gear and dove in, their flight suits dragging like anchors. By 1700 the order came: abandon ship. Fletcher, his face ashen, watched from Astoria as the last boats pulled away. Yorktown's ensign dipping in salute. Destroyers circled the survivors, over 200 men bobbing in rafts and on floats, while the carrier, awash and burning, floated dead in the water, her fate sealed by the day's cascading errors. Spruance, ever the tactician, pressed the pursuit. Enterprise's scouts vectored toward the retreating Japanese cripples, Mikuma and Mogami, cruisers limping from a morning collision and strafing runs, dauntlesses from VS-6, led by Lieutenant Walter Gallagher, lifted off at dusk, their bombs finding Mikuma's vitals in a fiery dusk plunge. Explosions lit the horizon, the heavy cruisers 7. 9-inch guns silenced as she burned, her crew abandoning to the destroyers Horatio and Asashio. But as night cloaked the battlefield, Yorktown refused to yield easily. Hammond's wreck had drawn the task force tight, and reports of lurking subs, perhaps more from the I-16 flotilla, filtered through the static. Fletcher's ships formed a protective ring, searchlights probing the dark, the 12 minutes echo now a dirge for the lost. Reboarding parties prepared under cover of darkness, determined to tow the carrier home, but the ocean's grasp tightened, whispering of trials yet to come in the dawn. Aftermath in the gathering night darkness enveloped the Pacific at 2000 hours on June 4, 1942, the stars emerging like distant flares over the oil-slicked waters where USS Yorktown floated, a gutted behemoth adrift 150 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. The carrier's hull creaked ominously in the troughs, her list deepening to 30 degrees as seawater lapped at the hangar doors, extinguishing the last flickers of fire with a sibilant hiss. Captain Elliot Buckmaster, soaked to the skin in his life jacket, clung to a Carly float amid the bobbing survivors, his breath ragged in the chill night air. Over 200 men, pilots, mechanics, gunners, clustered in rafts and on debris, their faces pale masks, lit by the flashlights of circling destroyers like the USS Balch and Hughes. The salt spray stung open wounds, mingling with the metallic tang of blood and the faint, acrid residue of exploded ordnance. From the cruiser, USS Astoria's bridge, Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher directed the salvage with quiet intensity, his voice steady over the TBS radio despite the weight of the day. Reboarding parties, prepare to close. Secure the Yorktown at all costs. The 12-minute transcription error that had unraveled the morning strike now haunted this vigil, its ripples dooming the carrier to this limbo. Torpedo-ravaged, her boilers cold and pumps faltering. Fletcher had transferred his flag earlier, but Yorktown's skeleton crew, reinforced by volunteers from the Hammond's survivors, awaited the signal. Lieutenant Commander John Barry, pulled from the sea after his destroyer's sinking, led one such team aboard the destroyer Russell, its 5-inch guns sweeping the horizon for submarine shadows. You can sense the tension coiling in the dark, the low rumble of destroyer screws, the creak of oars in lifeboats as they ferried engineers back to the tilting deck. Chief Machinist's mate Hank Larson, bandaged and limping from the engine room inferno, was among the first over the side, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom to reveal twisted catwalks and flooded compartments where bodies floated like driftwood. "Rig the pumps, counterflood the starboard side," Buckmaster urged from a nearby raft, his orders relayed by signal lamp. The reboarders worked feverishly, hauling hoses from the destroyer Phelps, the canvas snaking across the gap like lifelines. Electricians jury-rigged generators, sparks flying as they spliced wires in the dripping bowels, the air thick with the mouldy reek of seawater and rust. Aboard Enterprise, 20 miles to the southwest, Admiral Raymond Spruance monitored the operation while pressing his advantage. Scouts from the carrier's VS-6 squadron, PBY Catalinas droning through the night, tracked the Japanese remnants, Mikuma ablaze and sinking, her sister cruiser Mogami limping south with a shattered bow from an earlier collision and dauntless strafing. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's cruiser force, bloodied by the day's exchanges, withdrew under cover of destroyers like the Asashio, their wakes trailing phosphorescent foam. Nagumo, rescued from Akagi's pyre by the destroyer Arashi, huddled in the battleship Yamato's flag quarters, his uniform stiff with salt, dictating a dispatch to Tokyo. Carriers lost, retreating to Truk. The Emperor's vaunted Kido Butai, Japan's carrier-striking force, lay shattered, 4 flat tops claimed in hours, over 3 Rosera's sailors consigned to the deep. By 0200 on June 5th, Yorktown's salvage teetered on the brink. The Phelps nudged alongside, lines securing the carriers as pumps chugged against the flood, expelling bilge in rhythmic gouts. Larsen and his team shored up bulkheads with collision mats, the canvas slapping wetly against the hull, but the damage proved too vast. Watertight compartments breached, her keel stressed from the torpedo concussions. Submarine fears mounted, sonar pings from the destroyer screen echoed false contacts, keeping the men on edge, rifles clutched against the night. Fletcher, pacing Astoria's chart room, weighed the risks. Tow her to Pearl for repairs, as Yorktown had miraculously survived Coral Sea or cut losses in this exposed position. Dawn broke grey and sullen at 5:30, the sun a pale disk struggling through low clouds as reboarders resumed. Buckmaster climbed aboard via Jacob's ladder, his boots squelching on the flooded deck. Directing counter-flooding from the auxiliary con. "Give her power, let's see if she swims." Engineers coaxed a boiler to life, steam whistling through pipes, and for a fleeting moment, Yorktown's screws thrashed feebly, nudging her forward at 2 knots. Cheers rippled from the decks, but elation soured quickly. At 0700, a fresh shudder rippled through the hull. I-168, Tanikazu Oishi's submarine, circling back undetected in the pre-dawn murk, loosed a final spread of 4 Type 95 torpedoes. 3 missed in the chop, but the 4th struck at 0710. Amidships on the port quarter, the warhead's detonation crumpling the already weakened frame. The blast hurled men overboard, igniting a chain reaction in the forward compartments, ammunition sparking. Fires flaring anew amid the oil-soaked wreckage. Larsen was thrown against a bulkhead, his leg snapping with a crack, lost in the roar. As the carrier heeled sharply, her list hitting 45 degrees. "Abandon! All hands abandon!" Buckmaster bellowed, the PA system crackling to life one last time. The Phelps fired a full barrage of depth charges, concussions blooming around the sub's dive. But Oishi escaped once more, his boat slipping southeast toward Japanese lines. Yorktown's bow rose skyward by 0900, her stern dragging, the sea bubbling up through rents in the deck. Reboarders leaped clear, swimming for the Phelps as the carrier rolled, her island dipping into the foam, the stars and stripes hauled down in final salute. She sank at 0938, a slow, dignified plunge that sent rafts dancing on the swell, the water closing over her with a final groan. Fletcher watched from Astoria, his fist clenched on the rail, the loss a bitter pill after the victory. Over 140 Americans perished that day, but the strategic calculus shifted irrevocably. Midway held, Japan's offensive stalled, their carrier production crippled by the loss of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, vessels irreplaceable in the war's industrial maw. The 12 minutes of garbled intelligence had cost Torpedo 8 dearly, scattering the attack and inviting Hiryu's revenge. Yet it forged the dive bomber's path to glory, turning potential rout into triumph. In Pearl Harbor by June 7th, cryptanalysts pored over captured signals, the battle's echoes reshaping the Pacific War. Spruance's task force steamed home, Enterprise's deck lined with weary aviators like McCluskey and Best, their dauntlesses scarred but victorious. The Mistake's shadow faded against the dawn of Allied momentum, Guadalcanal looming, the tide inexorably turning as Japan's empire cracked under the weight of its own ambitions.